For years, I believed the instability was mostly mine, and then that belief began to crack, not because I became calmer, not because the system improved, but because someone else described the same instability, and it didn't belong to me. That was the turning point. Before I continue, a brief note. What you're watching is a digital stand-in for me. Recording consistently with a degenerative disability isn't always possible, so this format allows these ideas to be shared steadily. This channel isn't about complaining for the sake of it, it's about examining how systems function in practice, especially when you depend on them. And in this episode, something shifts. The person who helped shift it was Alison. By the time I met her, she had already been in conflict with the council for years. Not one dispute, a web of them. Different departments, different decisions, social care, housing, disability funding, issues involving her children, verbal assurances later contradicted, policies applied inconsistently. It wasn't a single clash, it was fragmentation, sustained pressure across multiple areas of her life. Much of it happened over the phone. Conversations, escalations, promises, often without a clean written record, which makes accountability difficult. She spoke about it with intensity and clarity. There was force behind her thinking. I respected that, but I was cautious, not dismissive. Cautious, because sustained conflict shapes tone, and I wasn't ready to reinterpret my own experience through the same lens. I didn't cross-examine her. I didn't demand proof. I mostly listened, partly because what she described felt familiar, partly because I was still operating within an assumption. I hadn't had blind faith in the system. I'd been frustrated many times. I had felt angry, often. There were moments where I blamed the council directly, moments that felt unfair, dismissive, personal. But I treated those as isolated failures, individual incompetence, poor communication, not structural design. What unsettled me wasn't just her anger. It was repetition, across departments, across years, across domains. When she described funding that technically existed but strained in practice. Assessments that acknowledged need in theory but narrowed it in delivery. Responsibility drifting back toward the disabled person when something didn't align. It resonated, not identically, but recognizably. The difference wasn't that she was angry and I wasn't. We both were. The difference was where the anger settled. When someone within the council was dismissive or obstructive, and that does happen, it is easy for anger to land on that person. Sometimes that feels justified, but over time something more uncomfortable became visible. The behaviors were real, the tone was real, the defensiveness was real, but they were happening within something larger, a structure that seemed to produce similar outcomes, even when the people changed. If minimization were random, it would vary. When it repeats across cases, across departments, across years, it becomes harder to call it coincidence. That was the disturbance. Not a full conclusion, not a grand theory, just the growing sense that what I had treated as scattered incidents might not be scattered at all. And I wasn't sure yet what to do with that, because recognizing a pattern isn't the same thing as believing it. For a while, I kept two explanations running at once. I could see repetition. I could see how support narrowed in practice. I could see responsibility drifting back toward me when something didn't align. But I still assumed I must be handling it badly. Around that time, I pushed for a reassessment. The original Care Actor assessment I'd received years earlier had been brief and remote. At the time, I hadn't questioned it, I assumed that was simply how the system worked. With Alison there, I asked for it to be done properly. It took months just to get someone allocated. When the social worker finally came to my flat, Alison sat in with me. We went through daily realities carefully, physical limitations, practical consequences. It felt thorough, measured, nothing adversarial. If anything, it felt constructive. Then I waited for the written assessment. It didn't arrive, so I emailed. I asked directly, "What is the timeline? Can I have a copy of the assessment? Has it been submitted?" Replies came, but they weren't answers. They often never acknowledged the questions and didn't seem to make any attempt to resolve them. Timelines remained vague. The document never appeared. The exchange stretched out, back and forth, weeks becoming months, each reply sounding close to clarity, but never actually providing it. Eventually the replies slowed. Then they stopped. No explanation, no formal closure, just silence. At that point I escalated it to her manager. I found the contact details myself and laid out the situation plainly. The reassessment had taken place. The report had not been provided. Communication had dissolved. The manager responded, procedurally and evasively. But the pattern didn't really change. There weren't real acknowledgements, just vague indications that it would be looked into. No firm outcome. Time passed again. At one stage, without anyone saying it outright, I felt gently pushed toward letting it drop. Not instructed to give up, just left in a position where continuing required more energy than seemed proportionate. For a couple of months I did let it sit, but the underlying issue hadn't gone away. The allocation still didn't reflect my reality, so I pushed again. When internal escalation produced nothing concrete, I contacted my local MP and explained that I effectively had no active social worker and no functioning reassessment outcome. Within half an hour of speaking to the MP's office, I received an email from a newly allocated social worker introducing herself as my assigned worker. There was no explicit acknowledgement linking the two events. It simply happened. Later, in a separate conversation, it was confirmed to me that the allocation had been triggered by that external intervention. That moment mattered, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Movement occurred only when pressure was applied from outside. On its own, the situation had not resolved. And even then, the new allocation did not suddenly fix everything. Communication continued, delays continued, weeks stretched, staff illness, leave, administrative drift. Nothing explosive, nothing theatrical. Just sustained difficulty in bringing anything to a conclusion. At that stage, I still didn't fully accept a structural explanation. I was frustrated, angry at times, but I resisted the larger conclusion, partly because accepting it felt disproportionate, final. So I carried both possibilities at once. Maybe it was structural. Maybe I just hadn't navigated it properly yet. But coincidence was becoming harder to defend. And that was where I found myself. Not certain, just increasingly aware that things did not move unless something forced them to move.